All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to see so many of you joining us for the virtual book launch and presentation of Changing the Game for Generation Alpha, Teaching and Raising Young Children in the 21st Century. I'm joined today by the author, Valora Washington. Welcome. And I just wanted to do another reminder about the chat. Please make sure that you are sending it to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your comments. Valora is going to be doing a presentation, and at the end, we're going to be taking questions. So you can use your Q&A feature that is open, and I will be reading them to Valora at the end. You can also upvote if somebody has a similar question or one that you really want to make sure that we get answered today. That is in the Q&A, or you can type into the chat, but the Q&A will help us keep everything a little more organized. I wanted to read a quote that our friend Maurice Sykes, author of Doing the Right Thing for Children, wrote about the book Changing the Game for Generation Alpha, because I just think it really captured everything that's wonderful about this book. So I'm going to read that to start. Maurice writes, Valora Washington has identified 6 powerful, transformative megatrends that have the potential to reshape and refocus the way in which we think and talk about early childhood education, as well as race, gender, and class. She writes that it is a book of hope and activism, and that is true. It is also a book about leadership, raw courage, and truth to power. And I just think that's such a wonderful description of the book. So I'm really excited to be launching this book with you, Valora. It's been a joy to work on and to hear today about the megatrends. And I should also mention that Valora is the president of the Kale Institute. And I'm just going to hand it right over to you so we can get started. And it looks like maybe someone can't hear me. Is anyone else having, before we get started, if you can chat? You can hear fine. Okay, so I'm sorry, it might be the audio is working fine. Okay, so maybe just make sure that yours is working. And I'm sorry, with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Valora.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Red Leaf Press for working with me on this project. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for coming to listen to this presentation, this brief summary of the book today. Thank you so much. You know, I was an anthropology major in college, traveling around West Africa for a summer with a team of professors and students. And all I could ever think about was the children we encountered, their smiles, their laughter, their usefulness in their communities, their struggles, their opportunities. And that's when the passion hit me. That West African summer, I now realize, was a welcomed relief from the world I was experiencing back home in the United States. We generation boomers were coming of age in an era characterized by Vietnam War body counts, horrific civil rights abuses, a series of political assassinations, ideological competitions, and a looming drug crisis. We chose to sit in, teach in, march on, and organize. Issues of civil rights and justice predominated national narratives that largely focused on relationships between Blacks and whites. And being Black from that particular era, these conversations had a deep calling to me, a calling to which I answered yes. And yes meant service as an educator with a focus on young children. I could hardly wait to graduate from college and move on to advanced studies in child development. What could possibly matter more than helping each child to reach his or her full potential? The science of early learning was very young back then. With theory and animal studies, we believed more than we knew. The notion of childcare was controversial then, but it was widely accepted that early experiences for economically disadvantaged children might help them and our nation win the war on poverty. Head Start was created, and along with it emerged an array of educational approaches and evaluations that made it very clear that if we were going to talk about young children and to help them, we had to take into account the racial, cultural, linguistic, and social class variations of American childhood. Very quickly, early childhood education experiences were becoming more typical for all children. Growing numbers of women in the workforce at all economic levels increased demand for childcare. Kindergartens became mainstream, even if not mandatory. We moved steadily from believing we could enhance children's potential to learning more about how to actually accomplish that with effective parenting and teaching strategies. And now it is 40 years later. Where did the time go? I still feel that passion and excitement about advancing opportunities for young learners and supporting the educators who work with them. And now something important has changed. There is so much strong evidence now that the birth to 5 years are a critical period that shapes the rest of a person's life. The impact of early experience is proven to be a foundation to children's social, emotional, educational success when they're children, but also as they grow older. If there's any one message that has emerged from decades of research and experience, it is this: that the adults in the lives of children matter enormously. And adult interactions with children are a key factor in producing healthy, happy childhoods as well as favorable adult outcomes. But there's another clear insight, and that is, as a nation, we have moved from believing more than we know about child development to an entirely different phase. Now we know more than we're actually doing. In other words, the opportunities we offer to our youngest children lag far behind the science. As a nation, we have been reluctant to invest in children prior to elementary school. Yet that's when the brain grows fastest and the groundwork for the future is planned. Decades of research has demonstrated the benefits of strong parenting and effective early childhood education, not only to the child and the family, but to our nation as a whole. Our inaction has consequences. Relative to comparable nations, the United States has fallen below international norms in how well we support families and children. Research shows that parenting is a happier and more deeply supported activity in some other countries. Our relatively low investments result in greater infant mortality and achievement gaps that start early and become worse over time. As opportunity inequities mount, we decrease the ideal of the American dream that each generation will be better off than the one that came before. I'll go to the next slide now. But we can do better. We can be game changers. As parents and teachers, we can change the trajectory that we've been on so far. Taking action matters now more than it ever has. The boomer generation had a black-white focus, but our justice and equity lens has greatly expanded. Today's young families are composed of a very diverse mix of people, languages, cultures, and experiences. Within our youngest population, the Alpha generation, are those children born since 2010. Children of color are already a majority. Diversity is their signature. And as you will hear in this brief talk today, Alpha kids are profoundly different than the way we were in many ways that matter for parenting and teaching. It's no wonder that when polled, many of us in the boomer generation worry about the ongoing future of the American dream. But together we have hope, and we are not powerless in the face of these challenges. We can be game changers. As the 7 generations now living in the United States face our future together, I welcome and invite all of us to join the conversation about how we can raise and teach our Alpha kids. These children are being shaped by the legacies of who we were, as well as the megatrends of who they are. Each of us have to continue to do the best for the individual children in our lives, but we also have the opportunity, acting collectively, to make a difference in the lives of this unique generation. This brief talk is going to introduce you to the tech-savvy alpha generation and then offer strategies for enhancing their lives and the quality of life for their parents and teachers too. By reviewing the megatrends in the life of the alpha generation, providing some historical context, and shedding light on international trends, I hope that the book itself will persuade you to take action now to change the trajectory of a generation. Next slide. So we know, as Abraham Lincoln pointed out, that the best way to predict our future is to create it. So we want you to join the conversation. In the next slide. The conversation matters to all of us because it will influence the extent to which we achieve equity among our children, which we define as the elimination of racially identifiable trends in poverty, achievement, and preschool enrollment. No matter who you are, the conversation matters because there is considerable room for improvement in the status of all of our alpha children from all racial and social economic groups. As the Annie Casey Foundation reported, there's not one group of children that meets all the important benchmarks of development, and there are significant disparities between groups. This conversation matters because none of us can foresee the future for our children, but we can predict that we can plan and we can take action so that we can try to make the best possible platforms from which they can launch their futures. Now matters a lot because our children don't live in the long term. Their childhoods are now, and the choices that we make today are going to play a large role in determining the outcomes that we have for our children tomorrow. Along with several co-authors, I've been encouraging this conversation for several decades, but the alpha child megatrends make it more urgent now. In the year 2000, J.D. Andrews and I co-authored a book called The Children of 2010, where we tried to predict 10 years out what would be happening with our children. In the year 2010, JD and I edited a book called The Children of 2020, where we asked some of the leading thought leaders of our nation to think 10 years out about the future of our children. And now in 2020, this book, Changing the Game for Generation Alpha, looks at how this generation of young children, as the most diverse and tech immersed in history, presents new opportunities and challenges for the adults in their lives. In this brief talk, I will summarize some of the megatrends and game changers for Generation Alpha. The book itself has a lot more detail, of course, and if you want to know more about Generation Alpha, I encourage you to read that book. And I do want to say right up front that to be the game changers that we could be for Generation Alpha, it is going to take a lot of courage to do the work that we must do to really raise Generation Alpha. We're going to have to weigh and consider many, many new ideas as we are in the midst of this generational shift. We're going to have to reconsider some of our beliefs, and we might have challenging conversations with our friends and colleagues. But all of this is part of our growth, even though it ain't easy. So let's get started. Next slide, looking at the 6 megatrends that we have for Generation Alpha. The term Generation Alpha was coined by Mark McCrindle, an Australian social researcher who took alpha from the first letter of the Greek alphabet because this is the first social generation born entirely in the 21st century. With respect to Generation Alpha, 9,000 alpha kids are born in the United States every single day. 2.5 million are born every week around the world. In 2050, when the eldest of these children is 40, Generation Alpha will be 35 million people in the United States and almost 2 billion worldwide. There are 6 major trends about Generation Alpha that I think when you think about them together and you think about them intersectionally, create a framework for transformational change that will impact the children, impact women, families, people of color, and educators at all levels. So let's take a look. Generation Alpha megatrend number 1. Generation Alpha is going to live and interact with many more generational cohorts, largely because of the increasing human lifespan. The global average lifespan in 1900 was 31 years old, and it's now 72. In the United States, life expectancy is about 80, and a typical 65-year-old can expect to live to 85. So, what this means is that Generation Alpha is going to benefit from many more perspectives and learn from the various ways that different generations think and approach problem solving. But in the detail I provide in the book, I also point out that the interplay of generations is not without challenges, chiefly because of the perceived competition for economic security across the generations. Generation Alpha living with many more generations. Let's look at the second megatrend. The second megatrend is that Generation Alpha is going to be living and is living now in smaller and constantly evolving families. While the number of generations living may be increasing, the number of children is shrinking in each family. And the families in which they live have growing complexity and diversity. In the United States, one-child families continue to gain ground as the ideal family size has dropped from 4 kids, largely because it's so expensive to raise children, people say. Declining family size means that alpha kids are going to be a smaller proportion of the total population of the future United States. Now, this is not surprising when you consider that the parents and educators of the alphas, largely millennials and Generation Z, have come of age in an era characterized by relatively insecure career paths, a shaky job market, lower incomes relative to their levels of educational preparation, fewer economic supports, and a gig economy. Young adults, the millennial parents of alpha kids today, are facing crumbling infrastructure, climate change, inequitable educational systems, unfunded tax cuts, widening income equality, the threat of terrorist attacks, and even a pandemic. So all of these factors mean that the parents of the alpha generation, these children today, are less likely to have parents that are married to each other. Their parents are more likely to be older. Their parents are more likely to have a higher education. But Generation Alpha is a generation reared in a nation that doesn't have and won't have a dominant family form. There is no Ozzie and Harriet for them. The diversity of family types is a result of the overall drop in fertility, smaller families, decline in 2-parent households, rise in 1-parent households, blended families, and multiple partner fertility. And even more, the alphas families will be fluid. They are fluid and they're evolving and will continue to evolve throughout children's lives for many reasons, including non-marital cohabitation, divorce, remarriage, or death. And already a study is showing that about 30% of children under six, have already experienced a change in their family structure because of divorce, cohabitation, or another reason. They're going to be in smaller, constantly evolving families. Let's look at megatrend number 3. In all types of families, Generation Alpha's engagement with technology is unparalleled, even when compared to their parents, their millennial parents, who themselves were considered digital natives. Technology is infused into the Alpha's young lives by parents who are apparently quite comfortable with digital innovations and who are preparing their children for a life online, sometimes even before they're born. Millennial parents seem quite comfortable connecting their children to innovative technology tools such as health wearables, artificial intelligence diagnoses and treatments, or even robot surgeons. So technology is infused into these children's lives since infancy. And the members of the Alpha generation don't know and can't imagine how to live without it. Have you ever tried to wrestle a technology device from a toddler? That is a challenging experience. Generation Alpha is growing up with user-friendly and familiar conversational technology such as Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant in their homes. And so in the world of the alphas, interacting with artificial intelligence and voice assistants is just normal and natural. These kids will often assume that a device is touchscreen until proven otherwise. Now, this is a huge social experiment, but whatever the risk and benefits, it is very clear that alpha kids are very open to technology. In one video that I saw, a child said he'd rather have an iPad than a dog. Let's look at the fourth megatrend. Generation Alpha is going to be exceptionally globally connected. For Generation Alpha, technology opens the doors to the world, creating similarities across generations around the globe like we have never seen before. And Generation Alpha is certainly going to inherit a world in which global issues are likely to be front and center in their personal and professional lives. Generation Alpha is very much going to be influenced by shifts in global power and demographic shifts that have been occurring since the first of them was born. And although the United States may have a smaller child population, the world in general may be more demographically lopsided. Older adults may be concentrated in relatively wealthy countries and the young in relatively poor countries. And some countries will have high fertility and rapid population growth, while others will face decreasing population size due to fertility or immigration. Many futurists have warned already of potentially disruptive global economies, political unrest, and mass migration, to name a few. And in the United States, we're already seeing huge generational divides in how Americans view our own nation. Let's go to the fifth megatrend that I want to talk about today. And that is diversity is the signature characteristic of the Alpha generation. As it faces global issues, the US Alpha population itself is the most strikingly diverse generation in the history of the United States of America. Diversity is the new normal and likely irreversible. The new American family picture is very clear. An aging, slow-growing, and declining white population existing in tandem with rising racially diverse youth. Clearly, these racial and ethnic youth are the primary demographic engines of our nation's future growth. Let me tell you a few things we can expect to see. We can expect to see that ethnic blending is going to continue. The share of mixed race children is set to double, and the largest growth rates are projected for multiracial populations. We can expect to see that children of color are the fastest growing populations, especially Hispanics and Asians. We can expect to see that immigration will continue to be a strong factor in the growth of Hispanic and Asian populations. And we can expect to see that each new generation will be more racially diverse than the one that came before it. But here's the rub. Within this diversity, there are enormous achievement and opportunity gaps between groups, which have many implications for our future. We'll talk more about that later. And the sixth and final megatrend that I want to mention today is the fact that Generation Alpha is likely to transform adulthood in many important ways. As alphas become adults, they may make up the longest lived and wealthiest generation ever. They may be better, yet differently educated due to prized online and non-traditional certification options that will be available to them at every stage of development. They will typically begin school in early childhood and find that continuing education is a womb to tomb necessity for them as a result of more automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and many new pathways to demonstrate competency. Meanwhile, corporate sponsors are going to be eager to tap into them before graduation as they are a much smaller cohort. And this idea of graduation may even diminish as lifelong and more specialized learning becomes typical and retraining becomes even more essential. There are going to be many, many questions that strongly emerge on the American scene. To what extent will employment be more widely and fundamentally disrupted by automation? How will these potential disruptions change the meaning of employment or the educational requirements for any specific job? Will the future for less trained workers be dominated by low-paying service jobs that can't be automated? As career pathways become less predictable and less stable by both necessity and temperament, Generation Alpha may be a more entrepreneurial generation, expected to change jobs more freely, frequently, often on freelance contracts, as labor becomes more of a commodity, robots take over more basic production. And so we're going to see a fast-paced, flexible approach to work, which will be revolutionary and potentially jarring to the psyche. Along with the financial demands of supporting new employment models, there's going to be a boom in the aging population, just as Generation Alpha is reaching adulthood and moving toward their greatest earning potential. Alphas are going to ultimately have to support healthcare, social services, retirement systems for larger number of elderly people in society as a whole. And again, significant equity and opportunity gaps associated with group differences is not likely to be productive in this brand new world. Gender and racial inequality, if it persists, will have a growing effect on the national economic well-being as people of color become a larger than ever share of the adult population. Cultural shifts in the areas of employment and education could deepen cultural, racial, and social divides with an elite group of people taking highly specialized roles, leaving many, many others without meaningful work. So when we think together about these 6 characteristics, these megatrends of the Alpha generation, we see a picture in which race and gender inequities can loom large. These gaps will be demographically, culturally, economically impossible to ignore. Alphas are growing and maturing in an age when life has to be navigated in the face of constant and disorienting change for which there are no known answers. We are headed into uncharted waters. We must raise and teach our children in this context, understanding that there are many possibilities ahead. What we can know for sure is that all children, all families, all generations have to play a role in understanding and adapting to these generational shifts. All children must be able to enjoy the right to participate fully in the social and political lives of our nation if we want freedom and democracy to thrive and endure. Our destinies depend on enhancing the human potential of all people. And we also know from generations of research, as well as examinations of policies in other countries, that there are effective ways to accomplish this. So our questions become, will we? How can we? And when will we, as a nation, better address the human needs for social and economic support or create equal opportunity for all? How quickly can we close opportunity gaps that are related to academic achievement or poverty? These questions and our responses to them are the raw elements that can sow the seeds for incredible advances or for social disruption, or something that we haven't thought of yet. None of us can foresee the future for our children, but we can work together to prepare the best possible platforms from which they can launch their futures. So I'm going to briefly describe 3 game changers, 3 solutions that would make a difference for our children in the next slide. In my view, these 3 game changers can profoundly impact not only Generation Alpha, but all of us. Let's look at the first game changer that I propose: universal systems for supporting people, including paid family leave, greater visibility for unpaid work. These are the kinds of things that must become a normative foundation from which businesses and family life will thrive. Now, when we start writing this book at first, we were not in the pandemic, but the pandemic has only made this more true. This is a game changer because some research suggests that Americans would live 4 years longer if the United States had a safety net as generous as those of some European countries. There are also estimates that 600 infant deaths could be prevented if the United States had 12 weeks of paid family leave. And we know that these infant deaths are disproportionately children of color. Game changer number 1, we've got to have better systems of supporting people. Let's look at game changer number 2. I know that many of you listening are in the early childhood education field, so you know that my game changer number 2 is that we must have high quality, tuition-free childcare and early childhood education available for all children everywhere. Because decades of research has already shown us that if we can get more equity, economic, social benefits, educational benefits that are produced for the children, for the families, for the communities, for our nation, if we had childcare, early childhood education for all children everywhere. This is a game changer because absenteeism and lost productivity due to childcare crises cost employers about $3 billion a year. And that was before COVID-19. Childcare is probably one of the largest barriers to gender equity in the workplace. And research has shown that in industrialized countries, Subsidized childcare and education had the single biggest impact on women's employment. Research estimates that if United States women between 25 and 54 participated in the labor force at the same rate as they do in Canada or Germany, there would be 5 million more women in the labor force, which would translate to $500 billion of additional economic activity per year. And if the United States implemented family support policies as generous as the average ones in other countries, women's labor force participation would rise about 7 points. Yes, it helps the economy when women are employed. It also helps out the kids, especially since 40% of these kids are living in a single woman household where the mom is supporting them. In families that can't find childcare, mother's likelihood of employment is strongly impacted. And not surprisingly, most of those impacted negatively are low income women of color. And yes, our nation is even more prosperous because of early childhood education. A policy brief by the Brookings Institution concluded that the impact of a high quality universal preschool policy on economic growth could add 2 trillion, that's with a T, trillion, $2 trillion to the annual US gross domestic product by 2080. Good reasons for this game changer. And the third game changer that I'm going to suggest today and talk about today is this idea of opportunity equity. There's a lot to be said about that, but I'm just briefly going to say that equity of opportunity for all Alpha children must become a unifying objective for educators. It's important for family empowerment and mobilization. As key drivers of our children's futures, families have to lead efforts to close achievement gaps because in the diverse nation that we already are and will become even more of, we cannot prosper if large numbers of our children are left behind. Just as Generation Alpha represents a future promise, there are contemporary disruptors that, left undisturbed and unchecked, can limit or eradicate the opportunities that Generation Alpha represents. Allowed to persist, inequalities within our nation can increase social tensions that limit child development. Frontline, proactive developments and support for people, for early childhood support and equity for all children is what's going to pave the way for our national success. Next slide, please. So as I've shown you these 6 megatrends and 3 potential game changers, I want to say that these strategies are adaptations to the world we live in, that we're entering now. That's a world in which innovations in artificial intelligence change the nature of work and redefine the roles of people who do the work. That's why it's so important for education. This is a world in which variations in the size and the racial composition of generations is going to result in larger numbers of 2 groups, which is the elderly and young people of color. This is a world in which there's already so much strong evidence about how to change the game. The research is there, but we know more than we do. The strong evidence about the benefits of developmentally appropriate early education, family support, and equity are already there. Now, it is important for me to say here as we come to the end, that these game changers are not political party platforms. They're strategies in the national interest for everyone. These game changers are not ideological positions. They are responses to demographic and social realities. These game changers are not for special interests. They're going to benefit all children while promoting our national unity and strengths. Some of you may be asking the question, are these game changers achievable? And I will say that most certainly they are. I have already seen so many changes in this work for children over my 40 years of working in this field. Some of you are still asking, are these game changers really achievable? And what I would say to that is, whatever the challenges in store, we must certainly try to achieve them because now matters a lot. Next slide. Change is not optional. When you think about the megatrends, you already see change is here. It's not optional. That means that our courage cannot be optional either. We have to look clearly at the opportunities presented by the transformative alpha generation. We have to think about how we as adults can influence the direction of change during this significant generational shift. We have to accept the bold challenge to prepare ourselves for our future and their future in a context that we as adults have never experienced before. And we have to think about taking the opportunity to engage in public dialogue about how our communities and our nation can move ahead with more audacity and more hope. Yes, it's going to take a lot of courage, but it ain't easy. But as Robin DiAngelo points out, the key to moving forward is what we do with our discomfort. We can use it as a door out and blame the messenger or disregard the message or disregard the megatrends, or we can use it as a door in by asking, what can we do? And how do I get started now? The reality is, this is work that has been going on for decades, but it's also work that never stops. And it's work that has to change because of the mega trends that are affecting us now. We can move forward if we have the courage to deal with these issues head on. Racism, sexism, and other social ills have a long, appalling, painful past that has yielded unfortunate contemporary consequences for alpha children. Yes, these realities have plagued us for generations, but they don't have to be permanent. We have hope always. We have empathy and compassion. We need to recognize equity as a path to equality and encourage restorative justice for the alpha generation. This is a participatory conversation that's vital to the well-being of the alpha generation. And for a better world, we can all say, yes, we can change the game for the alpha generation. Thank you very much for listening to this brief summary of the book, and I will look forward to having your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Valora. Lots of love in the chat. I don't know if you could really follow along while you were presenting, but lots of people really excited about the content. I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to read off, and a reminder to everyone, you can still type in your questions using the Q&A feature or in the chat, and I've got a couple ready that I'm going to try to combine a little bit. First one is, I'm wondering if you can talk about the audience. As you mentioned, a lot of our audience today are early childhood educators. They're in the field, but I'm wondering if you can talk about, who you were really hoping to reach with this book.
Well, we do hope to reach parents, but since you mentioned they're early childhood educators, because one of the things that we talk more about in the book is the strong role of parents. and how parent leadership with us as educators is really what it's going to take. When we look at other countries who have made more progress in some of these areas, what we see is a strong parent activism. And I think that as professionals, we care deeply and we're working so hard, but we've got to work with parents and help parents to take a front and center role in demanding early childhood education and demanding family support. And so I'm very proud of early childhood educators. I'm very proud of early childhood educators more than ever because of how we have stood up and responded in this COVID epidemic. We are American heroes. You know, it's so sad that people keep talking about us being essential, but they're paying us like we're not essential. The low wages, the long hours, the lack of care for the work we do, people not understanding that we are professionals and we're not babysitters, when we are producing so much for the economy and for the long-term benefit of children in our nation. I'm very proud of early childhood educators. I'm very proud to be an early
Mhm.
childhood educator. But what I'm saying is we have got to get parents standing up with us.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely can see using this book as a book club read with families, not just parents. I know somebody commented in the chat about specifically Game Changer number 2 would really help grandparents that have custody of their grandchildren. So that goes back to
Absolutely.
another mega trend of the evolving families. So that's really great. I'm going to go into the Q&A here. This question is from Joan. The trends in education towards increasing standardization seems to contradict the needs for the alpha generation who are living in times of so much change. How can we transform education policies around the standardization to meet those needs of all children? And I've seen a couple of questions about beginning to advocate too. And so I'm wondering if maybe that you can combine that answer.
Yeah, for a long time, we've been seeing a lot of education policy and practice actually moving in the opposite direction, not just that I'm talking about, but educators on the ground are talking about all the time. That we see and we know that our children learn best with hands on learning. We see and we know and have a deep commitment to individual education and individual pathways to competence for our children as well as for ourselves as educators. But yet we continue to see people want to mandate this cookie cutter approach to learning, to credentialing, whatever it might be. And I really think I think COVID is just the beginning of showing that it doesn't work and it's ineffective. And I think that although we have been saying this for a long time, um, the mega trends are going to make it more essential that you can't ignore that this is not going to work for our children. I think also employers are going to make it clear that it doesn't work. We're going to see more employers offering training and offering pathways outside of the traditional university from which they'll be hiring people and moving people forward. So I think that the marketplace in a way is going to move in a way that is going to challenge a lot of that traditional educational policy direction.
Mhm. Agreed. Yeah. A lot of, again, a lot of love in the chat for that. Um, this is from JK. Following the idea that we know more than we do with regard to ECE, how do we address the trend towards digital/online preschool when research does not support that this is a developmentally appropriate model?
Oh, wow. Um, I've been sitting back and wonder if we've issued everyone an iPad and a computer and told them to sit in front of it for hours a day. Whether you're in high school or in preschool, this is really challenging. We know that this is not how children learn. Children need hands on activities. And, we've got to upend it. Instead of having the kids go online, why can't we provide resources either to the families or to communities to support children having other kind of activities? We also know that organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and so forth have long not advocated children spending this much time with screens. So, this kind of trend that you can have an online preschool or whatever it is really not in alignment with what the best of what we know has been for a long time. I know that in a COVID environment, it seems expedient and convenient, but how much learning is actually going on? I think it's going to be interesting to find out. And I think the years are going to reveal to us in the future, especially as children become more verbal and can reflect with us more about how they're experiencing this COVID year, how much learning is actually taking place. I wonder. That's a
Mhm.
researchable question for all of you PhD candidates out there.
That's great. Um, we have a question from Julia about the book being translated. It is currently only available in English. There is potential that we might have it translated in the future, but for the moment, it is only available in English. It's a great question. Um,
Yes, and I do wanna
mhm,
say it is only available in English right now, but I think people who have been following my work over many years know I have a deep commitment to, having things available in multiple languages, and this is something that I care a lot about. And I think also when you think about the megatrend, and the different populations that are children, it's really important to have information accessible for all people.
mhm, absolutely. I have a question from Nancy. Thinking about systems, it seems that there needs to be much more collaboration and coordination between early childhood and the K through 12 systems.
Mhm.
I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and again, in my career, and you can go to our website at the Kale Institute. I've worked for a long time in the intersection between the community-based early childhood and the public schools. That's a big piece of work that I've done, working cross systems between the community-based world and the K-12 world. And what I can say is, particularly in the early years when I first start doing that work intensely. It's challenging because of the different systems and the different requirements and so forth. But it's also possible, and that I found that working across these systems and bringing people together across these systems has been very powerful. I also found initially there'd always be distrust, but it's very powerful when those systems come together because what we have in common between community based systems and the traditional K-12 systems is that passion for children, that passion for families, and that transcends. And we can start thinking about how do we assess children's progress? And we start thinking about it from a developmental point of view rather than from the point of view of which tool do we want to purchase. You get a lot of power in those conversations across systems.
Yep. Oop. So, so sorry there. All right. Just want to take one more look at these. We've also had some comments about pediatricians being an important stakeholder. I think that's a great point as well. And these game changers and advocacy, this anyone that works together for this generation alpha is a good audience for this book. So um, I oh, here we've got one more. From Nancy, do you feel positive about the future and our ability to meet the challenges? I think that's a great last question before we wrap up. So thank you, Nancy, for that.
Absolutely. I feel extremely optimistic, but I'm not naive. I'm optimistic because I've been working in this field a long time and I've seen tremendous progress in this field a lot for a very long time. And so I'm very optimistic. I also realize that it is a very difficult work. And I know that right now, as our whole nation and our field is in the midst of a lot of equity conversations, that it is really challenging at the heart of us, even though in our field, we have had stronger positions for equity than perhaps any other profession. I mean, we have been very strong writers about our concern for equity for decades, but we haven't always been able to practice what we've written about and what we've loved and what we've said is developmentally appropriate. But I feel optimistic because I've seen so much progress and I believe in our people and I know the heart of early childhood educators. And I know that we can get through difficult dialogue because I've seen us do it so much before.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Valora. Thank you, everyone
My
who joined us
pleasure. Thank
today.
you.
I do want to mention that Valora's book, this was all based on Valora's book, Changing the Game for Generation Alpha, that is currently on a truck to our warehouse. So you can order it today and it will ship out Monday. And for joining us, we are offering you 15% off using the code Valora on our website, which is redleafpress.org. You can also call customer service to place your order or send us an email. I also want to give a shout out for our program Early Childhood Activities. This is a texting program, so you register with your mobile phone and you can sign up for Monday, Wednesday, or Fridays. That's infant, toddlers, preschool, or school age, or you can sign up for all three, and you will get weekly activities sent directly to your phone to use. They're all from Red Leaf Press resources, so they're all developmentally appropriate. They have things like STEM, art, transitions, all sorts of different things. So that is a free service that Red Leaf provides, and we would love to have you guys sign up. That's also available on our website, redleafpress.org/text. We will also be sending out an email of this recording to everyone that registered, and it will include a certificate of participation for spending the hour with us. And again, we really appreciate this. You know, I know it's the end of
Thank
a
you.
very long, hard year. So we
Mhm.
really appreciate everyone being here, Valora taking the time to present, and all of your hard work over the last 40 years and also on this book. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in this conversation.
Valora, I want to share this comment here from Deborah that they still have the book Children of 2010 and they visit it regularly.
Oh,
So,
well, I
so
get the
she's
comments and
like,
everything because I couldn't look at them at all.
oh yeah, I will save everything for you.
Okay, great.
So,
How do you
all
think
right.
it went?
Oh, I think it went very well. Here, I'm gonna stop recording
Yes, please.
and I will give you